Good evening. We're going to continue tonight with the third chapter of Hilchot Beit HaBechira. I'm trying to find a way, due to my lack of knowledge of how these technologies work. We're on YouTube. I never learned how to share my screen on YouTube, so I'm sorry we're not going to have it up on the screen. But as usual, I have my copy of the Korean edition. I recommend using the Machon Mamre edition. Recently, the founder of Machon Mamre passed away. We were all indebted to his valuable project. I myself have been using Machon Mamre for, I don't know, 15 years or so, even before I even realized I was using it. And it has been a real service to Klal Yisrael. It's a real zchus that he did that. And I only regret, I've regretted a few times already that I did not get to meet the gentleman before he left us. But we are sincerely indebted to him. We didn't finish the second chapter last week, so we are going to finish it now, and also a few notes. I kept my notes here, and the first thing is we have too strong an argument. A lot of times we make this argument of pikuach nefesh. There's two basic biblical sources for the concept that pikuach nefesh, in a case of threat to life, we violate. The first concept, as Maimonides brings, is the idea of Kiddush Hashem. There's a commandment that God says he should be sanctified among the children of Israel. Kiddush Hashem, he points out, means that one is supposed to give his life rather than transgress certain sins. And he says that's the big three, as per the Gemara and Sanhedrin. The Gemara says that a person should, or at least a Jew, should give his life rather than engage in one of the forbidden relations, idolatry, or bloodshed. And the Gemara points out there that Gentiles have no such commandment. That is, even though Gentiles are not supposed to, let's say, commit adultery, worship idols, or murder, just like a Jew is not supposed to, when a Jew is put into a position where he is forced to do so, the Jew is supposed to, at least before the fact, the Jew is supposed to give his life rather than transgress. But the Gentile has no such prohibition. The Gentile has no such commandment either. He has no commandment, he has no prohibition to do such a thing. He has no commandment to choose death. He is not commanded to sanctify God's name. So it's totally within his rights to decide, well, if he's being forced into committing a murder, so he can do so. And even after the fact, if a Jew were to do such a thing, a Jew were to choose to worship idols, bow down to the idol instead of giving his life, he's done the wrong thing, but he's not held accountable for such thing because he is an anus. That's learned from the Pasuk describing Kiddush Hashem. Then there's the idea of Wahai Bahem, which we saw in a recent triennial reading. I'm sorry that when I was discussing it, we were discussing the basic commandments there of the prohibited relations. But we should have also made a note that V'chai Bahem is used as a source for, let's say, a Jewish person violating the Sabbath. He's bidden to violate the Sabbath, doing an action that would normally be considered a forbidden labor on the Sabbath, like driving an automobile. At least our old-fashioned automobiles that use internal combustion engines, combustion is a fundamental halacha. It's one of the big 39. And it would be otherwise forbidden to drive an automobile on the Sabbath. But in order to save one's life, to get the patient to the hospital, for example, so we would drive cars on the Sabbath. And we do that all the time, at least until the electric cars become much more common. I've seen quite a few, but so far they haven't overtaken the market yet. And that'll be a different question. But for now, we do that. And this argument that pikuach nefesh overrides the Torah is a little bit too extreme. Why? Because that's talking about, but we have some exceptions to that. For example, if you look in Kiddush Hashem, you see that once it's a time of persecution, a Jew is supposed to give up his life even for the most minor infractions. The Gentile comes and tells him, eat a ham sandwich during Holocaust times, or else. So he is to give his life at that point. Why is that? And the answer is because this idea that sanctification of God's name has to happen is a principle of overriding principle in Judaism. That is, normally we would tell a person to sin because it's not really such a bad thing that he gives his life now, he'll be able to perform the commandments later. But if the whole point of the Gentiles, they're trying to destroy the Jewish religion, they're trying to, it's let us say lahachis, or the other example the Gemara gives, the Gentiles specifically trying to get the Jews to do an avirah. He enjoys seeing Jews violate their Torah, so they're supposed to give their lives. Sometimes we are supposed to give our lives to for a much more important cause, the principle of the matter. So we can't over-apply this rule. Or v'chai b'hem. There were, of the previous generation, there were great rabbis who said that perhaps, going to war against our enemies is just going to lead to a lot of Jews dying. Perhaps it's even better to, I don't know, give up large tracts of the land of Israel to Jews' mortal enemies in order to placate those enemies so that they don't kill Jews. And like Rav Shechter pointed out, that's not exactly so true. Why? Because the Torah itself commands us to engage in war to protect the Jewish people and to conquer the land of Israel and control the land of Israel. So it cannot be. And of course, people die in war. War necessitates some people giving their lives. The Torah is already commanding us to do that. Therefore, pikuach nefesh does not override this idea that we are supposed to hold on to the land of Israel. Hold on to the land of Israel and supposed to even volunteer our lives, endanger ourselves in order to do it. So certain commandments are inherently dangerous. So pikuach nefesh doesn't override them. Sometimes we have to live our lives. My point in this day and age is that we can't just say, well, pikuach, out the window, all bets are off. No, pikuach nefesh is a consideration. And sometimes it's very simple. When we're talking about pikuach nefesh and the Jewish people as a whole, there might not be such a case. The Jewish people as a whole are commanded to sanctify God's name, and sometimes means they have to make an ultimate sacrifice that could even be painful. Further, this idea of trusting doctors. There is that concept in Gemara, for example, for one individual patient. An individual patient, for example, on Yom Kippur or on the Sabbath, he wants to know, should he violate Yom Kippur and eat? Do we need to violate the Sabbath? We listen to the doctor who's treating that patient. He has a certain amount of credibility, or even that he has a certain amount of authority. Under no means, though, have we ever seen that the doctors, whoever they are, could ever have, let's say, a Sanhedrin of doctors who can say, you know what, so-and-so is dangerous, therefore no one should do it. And the Sanhedrin, that is, the Jewish people who are following the halacha, have to listen. There's no such thing. There never was. We don't follow the doctors, especially in our day and age, as we've seen, unfortunately. It's been politicized, just like rabbinics and politics do not mix. They should not be politicized. Halacha should not be politicized. We have seen medicine, physiology, epidemiology, and other hard sciences corrupted by the ever-present corrupter, politics. And once medicine has become politicized, this is all out the window. Let's get back to the halachot. We're at the halacha, at least in my edition, it's halacha. Found this place of the altar. The chapter began with where Maimonides is describing how the place of the altar is a traditional place. Okay, we're going to wait. Trying to reconnect. We lost internet for a second. It's even a miracle we have power, by the way. Like 4 power outages here in town. Momentary power outages, but that's something that we've had before. So we're going to wait. Okay, we're back. King David, it says, was the one who found the place of the altar. But Maimonides brings, at the beginning of this chapter, how man was created at the place of the altar. That's where Adam built his altar. That's where Noah built his altar. That's where Abraham offered Isaac. It was a traditional spot. And in the Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam says that there was a select few who knew that eventually the temple would be built at that spot. The temple's not built at the side of the altar. The altar, by definition, is somewhere to the east of the temple edifice. So if we knew where the altar was, it means that the temple is to the west. The actual, like we said, the Ulam and the Heichal, those are to the west. And that, Maimonides says, was a tradition among the prophets from Moses, except it was kept a secret. And David himself, according to the Talmud, sought this place when he was a fugitive, when he first had to escape his father-in-law, King Saul. He escaped to Samuel's house, Samuel the prophet who had anointed him. As Rabbi Golderach pointed out to us, Perhaps that's when Samuel explained to David that he had been anointed specifically for the kingship. Back in the olden days, he could have anointed someone for some other purpose. When David was anointed, it wasn't necessarily the case that he was told for what purpose Samuel had anointed him. Perhaps as we saw with Elijah and Elisha, he had been anointed as a successor to the prophet himself. David was already perhaps, or as was on the path to prophecy. He became one of our greatest, if not a prophet, one of the greatest, almost a prophets in Jewish history. Writer of the Book of Psalms. Maimonides doesn't consider him a prophet, although Rashi does. And be that as it may, David, according to the Gemara, found where the altar was supposed to be. Not the altar, sorry, the place where the temple is supposed to be. But he had not yet found the place of the altar. And that's why when he became king, he moved his capital to Jerusalem. But it was only much later, after the plague had wiped out quite a few thousand people, a plague of perhaps his doing, when he did an unauthorized census of the people, he was instructed to go and build an altar at the threshing floor of Orient the Jebusite. That's what we read about. That's what ends the book of Samuel. And that's right in the middle of the first. And that's when David discovered the place of the altar. He knew that the temple was supposed to be in Jerusalem. He probably knew which mountain it was supposed to be, but he didn't know where to put the altar, and that was the missing piece. And interesting that these two facts are separated. David, it seems that in the book of Samuel, the first thing he did as king was move his capital and the altar to Jerusalem, but finding the place of the altar was something that was much further delayed. As a matter of fact, there are some who interpret all of the events listed in the end of the book of Samuel in strictly chronological order, which means that it was only in the last few years, shortly before his death, that David actually found the place of the altar and could really begin the preparations for construction of the temple in earnest. That is, he was gathering materials, perhaps drawing up the plans, but he didn't have the exact location yet, and he didn't even own it. It was only then that he bought the location. So this is a very interesting point. I don't know. I haven't seen a source for what Maimonides says regarding the fact that there were those who always knew that the temple was to be built on Mount Moriah. I would think that the Torah itself is perhaps intentionally ambiguous. I would have thought, for example, that perhaps Bethel was the place, because Jacob himself said that that place should be a house of God, not just any house of God, the house of God, perhaps. So there is what to be said about that. I recommend someone look there for further iyun, but let's get through the halachot here. He says, "Bonim hamizbeach bonim oto kulo atum kemin amud, ve'ein osim bo halal klal." The altar should be completely solid, no hollow spaces inside. Ela mevi avanim shleimot gedolot tano mevi sid v'zefet konya u'mamachev v'shofech letoch malbein gadol k'midatho v'nei weldah. Building the altar is you make that frame, that wooden frame, and you fill it with large and small stones. Remember the trick: use the larger ones first, then fill in the gaps with the smaller stones, and then pour in things like cement and tar, etc., and make it a nice solid block. And keep building one block after another, because we saw that the altar was tapered. There was a first layer was 32 by 32. That's so, but then the next one was an amoles. It was 31 by 31, and then further recessed as you went to the top, such that the top surface had an area that was only 28 by 28. But it's intentionally that they not leave any hollow spaces. It's very important not to. ונותן בתוך הבניין גוף של עץ או אבן בקרן דרומית מזרחית כמידת היסוד, וכן נותן בתוך כל קרן וקרן עד שישלים הבניין ויסיר הגופים שבתוכו הבניין, כדי שתישאר קרן דרומית מזרחית בלא סוד ויישארו הקרנות חלולים. But there is something that's hollow. Like we said, the base, even though technically speaking it's 32 by 32, it didn't exist on both the south side and on the east side. So those sides, he basically fills in the frame with another piece of wood, so that while the cement is setting, it doesn't flow out into those spaces. And then when he removes the wood, he also removes these blocks. And it turns out the yesod is just missing at that spot. He also says that an exception is the actual so-called horns of the altar. The four structures on the top corners of the altar were technically hollow. And he explains how to do this. This isn't such a difficult thing. Nowadays, you probably see this is how they build reinforced concrete in this country, they put up a wooden frame, and then they put in those. They use metal rebar, metal sections that are long and narrow, and then they pour the cement in those. That's the great reinforced concrete. And when the concrete sets, they remove the wood, and that's basically what he's describing here. Uh, he also says the expansion allowed for the libations to go into the top. The Gemara explains that it used to be they would pour libations. That would be most days it was wine, but on Sukkot there was also water. The libations had to enter the shitim. There's these channels that went deep underground. And they describe how in the first temple era, a Kohen would stand at the edge of the top of the altar and basically pour the wine or the water over the side of the altar down onto the poles. And eventually they realized part of the expansion of the second temple's altar, remember it gained quite a few amot on each side. It was expanded toward the west and toward the south, such that the place at the southwest corner where they would pour the libations, now those holes actually were completely covered by the top surface of the altar. Now they're directly below the top surface, the top of the southwest corner thereof, such that they made two bowl-like structures that looked like sinks, basically, two bowls at the top of the altar, which had their pipes going straight down into the shitim, and so that's what this accomplished. What's a necessary feature of the altar? The four horns and the yesod, and the fact that it be squared. That means that all the other features are not necessary. For example, the height. We saw this. We should get back to this now. There was a machlokes in the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. I keep forgetting because I'm not good with names in this regard. But I believe Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says that, technically speaking, the altar can be literally like it's described in Exodus, that is only 3 amot tall. We said an amma is basically 1.5 or 48 centimeters. So that would mean you have a 4.5 foot tall mizbeach. And he says that's what they made in the desert, even though the one in the temple was considerably taller. And we follow Rabbi Yossi, who says, no, even in the desert, the mizbeach was actually 10 amot in total, as we saw last week, 10 amot. When it says 3 amot, it meant that the area, the top section of the temple, what's called the Maracha, was 3 amot. The rest was 7 amot. 7 plus 3 is 10. And Maimonides ruled that we have to do like Rabbi Yossi. The halacha is that the Mizbeach, since Second Temple times has been certain dimensions, it must always be 10 amot tall and have a base of 32 by 32, exactly as he described. That's the way it's supposed to be. But now we're going to see that, and get this. If an altar lacks these horns, or this base, or the ramp leading up to it, or the squareness, it is disqualified. Because these 4 factors are critical. Aval midat or ko midat rochbo midat komato. Its measurements with regards to its length, its width, or its height, a non me'akvin. Those are not critical. So even though, yes, you're supposed to make a 10 amma mizbeach, 32 by 32 at the base, you could technically make it as small as the one literally described in Exodus, as per Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. As long as the mizbeach is no less than an area of 1 by 1 amma and 3 ammas tall, which is the most literal interpretation of Exodus, and also the way Rabbi Yehuda described, which is technically the dimensions of just the ma'aracha. Like Rabbi Yossi says, the ma'aracha of the mizbeach that was in the altar that was in the desert, which is actually the way Rabbi Yehuda has it. No, that's the way it actually was, the entire mizbeach. So we start. This harks back to the first part of this chapter, Halacha 3, where Rambam Maimonides ruled like Rabbi Yossi l'chatchila, but rules like Rabbi Yehuda b'diavad. Mizbeach shenifkam mibinyano. Part of its structure has now been blemished. It's missing a piece. Im nifkam mibino tefach. It's a piece missing, a chip in it that's as big as a tefach. Pasul. A tefach is a handbreadth. We said it's about 8 centimeters officially. Pachomi tefach kasher. If it's smaller, if the blemish or the chip that's missing is smaller than a tefach, then the altar is still kosher. V'hu shelo yehei banishar even piguma. And as long as what's left, there's no specific stone that looks like it's defective. And there's someone, they also write in the notes, some quite amazing notes here, that a person, when building his Be'ach, he says, Rashi writes, Katav she'ein lefachot mechamesh amot orech v'rochav. He says, no, it has to be at least 5 by 5 amos. Okay. Well, what's the machlokas? Because in order to create 1 amma of actual space on fire on top of the Mizbeach, if you look at a Mizbeach that has a 5 by 5 at its base, and it's completely rectangular, so you would lose, if you had a 5 by 5 square, you're looking from the top, from the bird's eye view of the Mizbeach, you have that the corners themselves each take up 1 amma, which means you now have a ring of basically 3 ammas to work with. And the Kohanim could basically stand on the outer ring of 3, which is basically 3 by 3 ammas, but they need place to actually burn the korbanot, so that would leave a space of 1 by 1. So when Rashi's looking at this, he's saying, in order to allow for a space of 1 by 1 to be burning on top of the altar, you need a total of 5 by 5 ammas. And when Rambam says this, it just has to be 1 amma by 1 amma area. He's talking about the actual Mizbeach. Perhaps he didn't make this calculation, how much area you need for the fire, how much area you need for the horns, how much area you need for the Kohanim to be able to walk there. Okay, let's get into the 3rd chapter, the Menorah, the Candelabra. I like to make a joke. Menorah is the old Hebrew word for candelabrum. New Hebrew needed a word for light fixtures, so they took the word menorah. Traditionally, Jews who were not speaking Hebrew anymore reserved the word menorah for the thing that they light on Hanukkah. Except on Hanukkah, the halachic term is always ner Hanukkah or neirot Hanukkah, Hanukkah lamps. The menorah is a colloquialism. It might even be a Yiddishism. There's no halachic sefer that refer to it, even though Ashkenazic Jews were building menorahs and using them. So they came up with a new word in the modern era, because in spoken Hebrew, menorah, just as any other light fixture candelabrum, they came up with a new word, Hanukkah, a specific menorah for Hanukkah use. Or as I tell my daughters, I don't like the word Hanukkah, I like minorat Hanukkah or a menorah Chanukkatit. But whatever, it's a new word. When they say menorah, they mean they don't mean one specific like people think. Menorah is a candelabrum. Chanukiah means it has 9 branches. That's not necessarily true. Menorah is just any candelabrum. The one in the temple has 7 branches specifically. So I would say a menorah is not just anything; it's specifically 7-branched one. Okay, whatever. Before Hanukkah, you can choose what you want to do. Just like you could choose what kind of jelly you put into your jelly donuts, which you shouldn't eat according to the Rav. You should still know that there is a very specific thing in the temple. HaMenorah mefreshet suratah b'Torah. The menorah's structure, or its form, is very much detailed by the Torah. Arba'a gevim u'shnei kaftarim u'shnei prachim hayu b'knei HaMenorah. There were 4 goblets. It means basically a cylindrical ornament hammered into the gold of each stem, or each branch of the menorah. That's what a gavia is. Literally, gavia means fancy cup. So you've probably seen pictures of what the gavia looked like. Shnei kaftarim, that's basically a knob or a decorative circular or spherical form in the branch. Ushnei prachim. And the 2 flower-like ornaments. Hayu b'knei menorah, in the branch of the menorah. Shneimar v'menorah arba agivim meshukadim kaftareh fracheha. And in the menorah there should be 4 cups, meshukadim. The question is, what does meshukadim mean? That's a long one. How do you read it exactly? Kaftareh fracheha, and it should have its kaftors, its balls, and its flowers. And the minimum amount of, when it says a plural, it says it's kaftareh, it's knobs, and its flowers, means at least 2. And there was another perach, which was near the base of the menorah, and it's as it says ad recha ad kircha, v'shalosh raglayim hayula, and also at 3 feet. Normally, the central branch of the menorah he's talking about is, like I said, the central one. It's the one that's right down the middle. Everything comes out of there. Another 3 knobs in the Kinei Menorah, that's the center one. And from which you get the 6 other branches, the ones that come off the sides. 3 from this side, 3 from that side. Every branch had 3 more cups and 1 more knob and 1 more flower. And every one of them was meshukadim. Meshukadim means that it was hammered a certain way, so it had this cracked look to it, like an almond, almost. You ever see an almond once you shell it, but before you take off the skin, the almond has a certain texture to it, and they say that that's how you get it, by hammering it a certain way. I'm not a goldsmith; I don't know how to do it, but apparently this is something they knew how to do, and it gives it a nice texture to it. Nimtzu kol gevim shnayim v'esrim. Therefore, the complete total is 22 cups. V'aprachim tisha, 9 flowers. V'hakaftarim achadasar, and the knobs came out to 11. V'chulan makvin zeh, and they're all critical. You can't leave any of them out. Afilu echad mina shnayim v'arba'im v'akevet kulam. Even 1 out of 42 total ornaments ruins it for everything. They're all critical. Bemed devarma rim b'shal asahu zahav. When do I say this? That you need all the different knobs, flowers, and cups when the menorah is made out of gold. Wait a minute, isn't the menorah supposed to be out of gold? That's what exactly it's described in Exodus. It's the menorah of gold. If it was to be made out of other metals, then we do not make all these different ornaments. We don't make the cups, the knobs, or the flowers. Further, the menorah made out of gold has to be 1 complete talent. A talent is a large amount of gold. It would be quite heavy. I don't know why. I have to check this out. They said here, it says Shishim Manashim Elef Chameshmot Shkalim. It's 1,500 shekels of kodesh, and then they say Karbim Shtayim V'Chetzi kilogram. Comes out to 42.5 kilograms. I find that hard to believe. Even if you make a menorah as described here, the right size, out of iron, it wouldn't weigh just 42.5 kilograms. I'd be able to pick that up myself. We're talking about a large amount of gold. We've seen what the menorahs are supposed to look like. If you made out of pure gold, it would weigh a lot more than 42 kilo. So I have to check what's going on here. There's something not particularly correct here, unless I'm getting something wrong. Tzarchian. He says further, it should be it should be hammered out of 1 solid piece made from gold that was melted together. How do you do that? Well, normally you don't just find the talent of gold lying around. Even in Fort Knox, I don't know how much one of those gold bars are how much they contain. It's not a talent. What you need to do is you need to melt down a large quantity of gold together, and then hammer out the menorah from there. So as Maimonides discussing making the menorah out of other materials, because we have already seen, history also shows this. Technically speaking, if you do not have gold, so you use a lesser material, as long as it's not wood. And even the Maccabees themselves, they used the gold, they used the tin-covered spears for their makeshift menorah. The Hanukkah Miracle took place with a menorah that wasn't even really a menorah. And only when the community gets enough funds to afford a proper menorah, they keep upgrading until they could get one out of gold. History reports that in the desert they made 1 menorah, as described. It was a Betzal's menorah, and that was in use basically until the temple was built. Solomon added 10 more, and also 10 more tables for the showbread. And I would imagine that eventually those were plundered by the enemies. In the Second Temple times, they went back to using just 1 gold menorah, at least for regular use, although the Mishnah describes how they actually had 3. After the Hanukkah Miracle and the Hasmonean dynasty was able to expand and get richer, they were actually improving the temple a lot. Herod especially, even though for all his wickedness, he really invested a lot in the temple. And they always, like we saw, they had a fund to coat the inside of the temple with gold. They had eventually 3 golden menorahs, 3 golden altars, and 3 golden tables, because just in case things got contaminated, it takes some time to purify them. It takes like a week to contaminate, to, let's say, remove death contamination and involving mikvah and sprinkling them with paraduma during that paraduma ashes. So during that time, they needed replacements. So the Mishnah records how they basically had 3 golden menorahs in the Second Temple times, which is nothing to sneeze at. But sometimes they're not made out of gold. But you can never make it out of what's called grutaot, even if you're making it out of gold, and or even if you're making it out of other metals. That means broken pieces of other kalim. Let's say they smashed, I don't know, but gold doesn't really get broken into pieces, but sometimes it's referring to waste pieces, etc., of other kalim that have now been melted down. What they used to do is, so where do they get the gold for this? They collect gold coins. Shekel didn't necessarily mean minted coinage, whether silver or gold, or even prutot, little bronze pieces or copper pieces. It just meant a certain weight of gold. So when a person gave a shekel or half a shekel to the temple of silver or gold, it didn't have to necessarily have a form. It just meant that amount, and that was okay. That they used to melt down and used to make these holy vessels. There's some other things that go along with the menorah. Of course, you have to have tweezers in order to remove the wicks and other implements. It says the melkachayim are, like I said, the tweezers. The machtot are these ladle-like things for dealing with the oil, and of course everything else that handle the oil. Einon miklal kikar. Those don't come from the talent of gold used to make the menorah. Use different gold for that. So right now, marba menorah zahav tahor, it has to be pure gold. The chazar v'amar, and then it said further, umalkacheha umachtotheha zahav tahor, and it's tweezers and the machtot, that is, like I said, the ladles. Those are also made out of pure gold. The lo ne'amar ne'rotea zahav tahor, but it doesn't say that it's that the candles, that is the part of the menorah that actually holds the oil, are made out of pure gold, because the neirot part are part of the menorah. The neirot are included in the original talent. So the fact that these implements are described also as being zahav tahor, and they're aside from the menorah, means that their gold has to come from some other source, not just that original talent. This is an explicit in the Mishnah. The 7 branches of the menorah are critical. You can't have the menorah without at least one, missing even one of them. And the 7 cups that hold the oil, the 7 places in the menorah where actually you light the fire, those are also critical. Whether the menorah is being made out of gold or being made out of some other metal. And all the neirot, the areas for the actual holding the oil and the wicks, those are actually stuck as part of the kanim. Why? You would have had a havamina, like some did, they could actually remove those. And they even make menorahs. I know the menorah that I was given as for my bar mitzvah, although this is not a temple menorah, it has a way to remove the shamish. It looks like it's a 9-branched Hanukkah, as we said, but technically speaking, you could remove the top of the 9th branch, and use that to light the other candles. So you're not supposed to have anything like that with the temple menorah. Shishani rotak vimba shisha kadima yotzim menorah kulam pnehem la'aron haneram tzai shal kneam menorah v'zeh haneram tzai panav keneged kodesh hakodeshim v'hu nekra ner ma'aravi. This is a big machlokes. How to read the Mishnayot there? In which direction was the menorah oriented? We said that a person entering the temple, let's say the Kodesh, he's entering at the east and he's facing the west. The Kodesh, Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies, is at the west, and there's a parochet, a curtain, separating the holy from the Holy of Holies. The menorah is to one's left as he walks in. The golden altar is immediately in front of him, and the table is to his right. Both the menorah and the table are closer to the parochet than they are to the entrance, and the mizbeach hazahav, the incense altar, is more toward the middle of the room. Now the question is, the menorah, we know there's a western lamp. So there's some say that how do you orient the menorah? They say, well, the menorah is basically a line of candles, 7 candles. So they're oriented from west to east. That is, there's one actual, the rightmost candle is also the westernmost candle, and there's an easternmost candle, and the middle candle is basically between the east and the west. It's neither here nor there. That's how you'd orient it according to many of the Rishonim, the way they read the Mishnah. And it seems even the Mishnah says that. The Rambam says, no, it's not correct. The menorah is actually facing someone. That is, a person walks into the mikdash, he sees the candles arranged from north to south. There's one, two, three, four. He could the candles of the menorah. He's facing all of them as he walks in. So where's the western lamp? There, if they're oriented from north to south, there's no particular lamp that is any more west than the others. None of them are more east or more west than each other. So he says it must be the middle lamp. The middle lamp is sort of bent toward the west, and all the other lamps are bent toward that middle lamp. That's what he means the Ner Ma'aravi, the western lamp. And of course, according to the Rishonim, who would explain the Mishnah with this meaning, yes, there actually was a westernmost lamp. They don't need to say this. They don't need to give this this explanation. Now, like with a lot of things, even Maimonides would say, God willing, we have a Sanhedrin. This is one of those things that perhaps before we even get down to doing it, we'd actually need someone to, or someones, we need the Chachamim to finally tell us, so what is the answer? What should be done? Interestingly enough, it could be that even though we could have a historical tradition that one way was done, remember the Sanhedrin, they're the ones who ultimately interpret the Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's Rambam also says that. Even if perhaps the Sanhedrin would find that the halacha should not follow the Rambam in the future. And perhaps another Sanhedrin would agree, another Sanhedrin would disagree. The point is, whatever the Sanhedrin rules, that is what the Torah says you should do. So for these and other questions, God willing, we'll wait for a Sanhedrin to give us some clarity. We'll see. Does it mean an actual candle that's the westernmost, or the center candle that's sort of bent to the west? I look forward to finding out the answer, or at least seeing which way they would do it. I can imagine that the debate would be quite fierce because there are Rishonim on both sides of this, and it seems that it's kind of ambiguous from the words of our sages. Hagvim domin lekosot Alexandria. These cups, they look like Alexandrian cups. That is, they're almost cylindrical. They're conical, except they don't have sharp ends. It's like a cut off the cone. Sometimes there are modern cups nowadays. Shapi and Rachav Ushalem Katzar. They have wide mouths, but they have narrow bottoms. Kaftarim Kamin Tapuchim Beirutim. The knobs are like Beirut apples, which are very round, basically saying spherical. It would be like an egg, but it has two edges. You and I have our regular eggs. They have one side that's a little bit narrower than the others. Imagine you can make an egg where it has two bottom sides. The little Putians are fighting over which way you could break your egg. So you can imagine this. It's almost like an oblong, circular type of thing. There's some pictures here. For example, they show you Maimonides as they represent the kaftur there. That's just a circle. The prachim kmo pirchei hamudim. Prachim look like pirchei hamudim, which is the capitals of a pillar. Also, they show you here a capital pillar in the Greco-Roman style. Shein kmo karaos. It's like a plate with a lip that's doubled over to the outside. Okay. I'm sure that also there's a lot discretion involved here. No two artisans would make the same exact type of cups or kafturim or flowers as a previous. There are many nice books, Rabbi Macaver's book and Machon Mikdash's book, and they give considerable leeway for the individual artisan how to make these ornaments. Nothing so critical. But here's where we get to the part that is critical. First, the dimensions, and then the issue of the straight branches or the rounded branches. The Rambam says, Gova menorah haya shmona asar tefach. The total height of the menorah was 18 tefachim. 8 times 8 comes out to, that is 8 times 8 centimeters, comes out to 8 times 18 centimeters, comes out to 144 centimeters, which would be 1.44 meters. It's not that tall. Most men are taller than 144 meters. 1.44 meters. The 3 feet, that is the feet, not measure feet, but the 3 pedestals of the menorah and its bottom flower are 3 tefachim. U'shnei tefachim chalak. Then you leave 2 tefachim of, just branch of the menorah, the center branch. The tefach shabo gavia kaftor aferach, another tefach occupied by a flower, a gavia, a cup, and a knob. Utfachaim chalak, another 2 blank tefachs. The tefach kaftor u'shnei kanim yotzim mimena echad helach ve'echad helach, another tefach, and then a kaftor knob with 2 branches coming out of the sides, one to the right, one to the left. Nimshachim v'olim kineged gova menorah, and those 2 branches that come out from the right and the left eventually come to the same height ultimately as the center of the menorah. The tefach halak, another blank tefach. The tefach kaftor shnei kanim yotzim mimena echad helach ve'echad helach nimshachim v'olim kineged gova menorah, another knob from which 2 more branches come out, and those branches eventually start heading upwards on a diagonal, as the Rambam has it, until they get to the ultimate height of the center branch of the menorah. Another tefach halach, the tefach kaftor shnei kanim yotzim mimena echad helach ve'echad helach lim kineged gova menorah, and another knob, a tefach halak, a blank tefach, a knob with 2 more branches coming out of there, same as last time. Utfachaim halak, another blank 2 tefachs of no knobs or decorations. Nishtayru sham shlosha tefachim shabem shlosha gavim. They have another 3 tefachs for another 3 cups, kaftor v'ferach, and another knob and a flower. Zohi tzurata. So this is based on what we have. Actually, you could find this in a few books. They actually have a picture of Maimonides' own schematic. See, there it is. There's it's a famous picture he wrote. It's in the Parish note also, how the menorah is supposed to look. And that is apparently how he says to do it. And I'll give you the last halacha of the menorah. He says, there was a stone in front of the menorah which had 3 steps. That's where the Kohen would stand when he was preparing the lamps, and he puts on it the various utensils to hold the oil and the tongs, the tweezers, and the oil cup, and the ladle when he was preparing the oil, the candles for lighting. Now, as many have seen, they've written about this quite a few times. Did Maimonides really mean that in the schematic that the menorah is supposed to have straight branches? So the problem is that most of us grew up with this image of the menorah, especially as aesthetically, that it should have rounded branches. And indeed, we discover that a lot of ancient depictions of the menorah, especially from even thousands of years before Maimonides, at least 1,000 years before Maimonides, they all depict the menorah having rounded branches, most famously on the Arch of Titus, which was built by the people who destroyed the temple. And they actually depict, not only do they depict the various kalim that were taken out of the mikdash, including the menorah, they even have the moat, that piece of wood that they used to carry the menorah back in the day, because all of the major implements in the temple had staves. The Ark of the Covenant did, the Temple of the Showbread, the altar. The one thing that didn't have these staves, even the original bronze altar that became permanently attached to the ground, was much bigger, like we were describing the past 2 weeks. That also had these poles with which the Levites were supposed to be carrying these implements. But the menorah has no such poles. So how do they carry the menorah? And at the end of Parshas Bamidbar, it says that they actually said the Samu al Mot. They had a wooden thing called the moat. Moat basically means a plank with handles. It's not the first time it's mentioned in the Bible, and that's what they used to carry the menorah. And that's actually depicted on the Arch of Titus. Not only that, there were coins minted by Jews in later Second Temple times and times immediately after the temple, and they also depict the menorah as having rounded branches. Further frescoes and other artwork from around Second Temple times or slightly post Second Temple times in Jewish synagogues, what they call it, the mosaics and the decorations they put on the floor, they all depict rounded branched menorahs. So too various other things we found in houses in and around Jerusalem that have just been unearthed in our days. They all, without exception, depict a rounded branch menorah. So many have and basically said that, and this is the way the Machon Mikdash built their menorah, it's very clear that that's the way the menorah is done. And there's some people who are sticklers. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rav Kapach, said, no, when Maimonides drew the schematic, he specifically meant that the menorah had straight branches and is supposed to have straight branches. That's the way it's supposed to be done. And all the round branched depictions, those were not official depictions, so what do they know? And some have taken more conciliatory approaches. Maimonides just made this straight branched schematic just to describe to us the location of the various knobs and cups and flowers, but he didn't mean that the straight branches are a critical aspect. Otherwise, he would have said so, by the way. Just like he says, you need to have this very specific number of cups and knobs and flowers and actual branches of the menorah. He should have also said, and by the way, the straightness of the branches is a critical factor. He never said such a thing. He's just depicting it like that. So technically speaking, even though we know from history every depiction that I've described and then some, I'm willing to bet you that if they ever dig up something else, another depiction of the menorah from the very people who saw the menorah, it would also be rounded branches. Uh, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way according to Rambam. You could have it like this. You can make it straight. You can make it any other way. And there's some say even without the Rambam, perhaps yes, it did have rounded branches, but that was just an aesthetic choice by the artisan. You could have had a menorah made of straight branches or rounded branches. Perhaps Moses' menorah or some of Solomon's menorahs had round branches, some had straight branches. We don't really know. We have no actual remnants of those or any depictions of those. So I think that this is the best approach, that indeed we don't have anything specifically saying the branches should be rounded or straight. And we saw that, yes, apparently they were making round branched menorahs back in the day. That's true, but it could very well be that you could make them straight. There's no right way to make a menorah. Remember, the Torah called the people these artisans, chachmei lev. They were wise of heart, literally. It means they had technical know-how, but in order to have technical know-how, you also have to have an artistic flair. You have to know how to make things look good. And I would imagine that it's less about the roundedness or the straightness of the branches. Don't forget, even if you have rounded branches, there's a lot of ways to go with that. It's about making it look nice. And in the future, God willing, like I said with other machlokot, perhaps the Sanhedrin will rule that any way is permissible as long as it looks really nice. And that's what I would want to go with. But you can find it, Rambam's Ketav Yad, his manuscript, his actual handwriting. We know what his signature looked like. We know what we had. And for those of us who want to just follow the Rambam straight, I guess you have on whom to rely. Like I said, there's a lot of machlokas and the things that have not been resolved and perhaps not going to be resolved anytime soon. The next commandment is the next easiest thing to do in the construction of the temple. As we said, first you have to have an altar just to offer sacrifice. And then you can move on from there. The next easiest thing to do is have a menorah. All you have to do is light the menorah. You put it there in the temple, and that's what the Maccabees did. The first thing they did was reinaugurate the altar, build a new altar, and start the korbanot, and then they lit the menorah. This next mitzvah is a little bit harder to do. Why? Because you can only start doing it on the Sabbath. You don't build the temple on the Sabbath. As we saw earlier, the construction of the temple does not override the Sabbath, which means that had the Maccabees first had the opportunity to restart the temple service on the Sabbath, they would not have done so. You have to do all these things, dafka on the Sabbath, and we actually learn what's forbidden on the Sabbath, that which was done in the construction of the tabernacle. So that Sabbath is out of the question. Yet the next service we see here, which is the shulchan, the temple, the table of the showbread. The only time it can actually do its service is on the Sabbath. Every Sabbath, they would remove last week's loaves and then put on new loaves, new 12 loaves. And it says that the Kohanim actually had a system where they did this simultaneously. These two Kohanim were pushing on stacks of new bread onto the shelves of the table. It's really not a table. It's actually just a rack. It's like a 6-layered rack. None of us would call it a table nowadays. A 6-layered rack, as two Kohanim are receiving the breads from that. And the breads from the previous week that were then removed that Sabbath were divided among the on-duty Kohanim and the Kohen Gadol to consume that Sabbath. And it can't be that even though there's a commandment that this bread be in front of God always, lechem panim lefanai tamid, it should always be in front of me. And that's how they learned that even when you're switching out the breads, you have to make sure that there's always bread on the table. These ones are going in just as these ones are going out, so the table's never empty. you can only load it on the Sabbath. So if you start, let's say, this temple service, God willing, tomorrow is a Thursday. So Thursday they'll rebuild the altar right away and start with the korbanot, and they'll have a laver in order to wash their hands. The Kohanim will be ready to do that, and then they'll be able to light the menorah. They will not, even if they have a proper table for the showbread, and they'll even have baked showbread, they will not put the showbread on, not tomorrow and not Friday morning. They'll have to wait until Shabbos to do it. The table had a width of 12 tefach, which means 2 amos. Why does Rambam describe it as in terms of tefachs? Why does he describe it in terms of tefach instead of amoth? It's basically 2 amoth. That's what the Torah says. I don't know. And a width of, and a length of 2 tefachim. I got that wrong. Orko is a length of 2 amos, and a width of 1 amma. And of course, he says 6 tefach instead of 1 amma again. I don't know why. Its length was along the length of the temple, and its width was along the width of the temple, which is important to say because also we just said the whole question of how to orient the menorah is a big machlokas. Rambam himself was aware of those who disagree with him, and he actually writes in his Parashah Mishnah to address their claims. So it says here that just like you were standing in the Kodesh, that's the first room of the temple, you would see that from north to south is actually not as long as east to west. You're coming in from the east, you're looking toward the west. The length of this room is significantly more than the width of this room. So he's saying that the table of the showbread also has to be oriented along its length. The length of the dimension of the table that's 2 amos has to be along the length, the longer side, longer dimension of the Kodesh. And the same is true with all the other kelim in the temple. The length, their particular lengths, it means the longer side. The longer side is called the length. The shorter side is called the width. Has to be along the length of the temple. Except for the Ark of the Covenant, which was actually oriented opposite that. The Ark of the Covenant was quite wide. It had a length that is along the badim, along its staves, not like you could find online, like the kind that the prop one they made for that ridiculous movie. The Ark had its longer side was to 90-degree angle to the length of the room, and there was a reason for that. Well, we don't know it now, but that's the way it was supposed to be oriented, and such that there was 1 cherub on the right side, 1 cherub on the left side. And also the candles, they were keneged rochav habayit, benat tzafon l'darom. They're from east to west. From north to south. That basically was that you would have the menorah, like the Rambam says, because they're between north and south. That means that they're equidistant from the north and south. They're actually oriented from east to west, as you'd say. He says benat tzafon l'darom, like we said before. You couldn't say that they're more to the south or more to the north. They're all the same distance, either north if you're measuring from the north or the south. Like I said, I wonder what it was that was driving Maimonides. Perhaps he had received traditions also for a number of these things, where he decided to take sides. I don't know. I wish that we had more explanation if he was here. It says here, L'dasa Ra'avad, Rashi. According to the Ra'avad and Rashi, these things were totally opposite of what we said. I have a good picture actually here. Look what you get from this Parashah Mishnayot. This is in Menachot. In Menachot, which is basically the laws of the meal offerings. They also have, it talks about how the menorah has to be built a certain way. And then it goes into the laws of tzitzis and other things, critical factors. So here is, like Rav Kapach put in his original Perush here, there's an even bigger Ktav Yad of the Rambam schematic. and here is an artist's more professional rendering thereof. And they have here, elsewhere, Rav Kapach was able to include with us how you would interpret the Mishnah that describes the actual order of the lighting of the menorah. So he says it over here. I find it very interesting here. It's in the Talmud. He says here, look, Amru Shtene wrote Ma'aravin, the two western candles here. Hu dat Misha Sever Kishivana wrote Hayu Bain Mizam Mizrach Marav Sidu Ron Achad the Gav Karov and Erma Ri Hashvi'i Kitzrak Zov Eina Lacha. Here's the way we don't hold light. So you orient the candles, candle 1, 2, 3, 4. Here is the east where you're coming in, and here's the west. So there's a westernmost candle. Says that's the way the Mishnah says, but that's not the halacha. There you go. But the Rashi and Ravad would beg to differ to say if that's what the Mishnah says, that's what the Mishnah says. But this allows it that, like the Rambam says, the length of the menorah is technically oriented the length of the house of the bias. So he says, no, that's why the Aron is an exception, the menorah is based on an exception. There you go. And God should enlighten us, and hopefully we'll be able to ask the Rambam all the questions we have regarding these things. He mentions another word here, which is, I've seen different versions, is the next word spelled with a tzadi or a samech. Those who speak Arabic and those who are familiar with the proper pronunciation of Hebrew know that the way we pronounce it, tzadi, in, let's say, modern Hebrew, let's, is not the correct way. It's closer to a samech. It's pronounced snifim. You bend your tongue a certain way to say it differently than the samech. So he says here, the arba'a snifim shel zahav hayud lashulchan. There's these 4 poles that stick out of it. In the Machon Mamre version, for example, this is actually spelled with a samech. Shel zahav hayud lashulchan mefutzalim merashehem. They're basically Y-shaped, as they show you in various pictures. You could see over here. It comes out of the base of the table, the surface of the table. So you have these 4 bases, these 4 poles that were Y-shaped. It basically becomes a total of 8 poles. With these 4 pillars, basically, they would put rods between them, and these rods made shelves in order to hold the layers of bread. See, there's 6 layers of bread in this picture over there. Basically, between the uprights, that's where you put the rods, and the bread goes between the rods. Why rods? So that there's aeration. Even though God was making a miracle and keeping the bread fresh, and then again, if you don't air bread, it's going to become moldy. But if you air it too much, it's going to dry out. You'd have to find that perfect balance of just the right aeration. It says, "Behind some 2 marachot, that means 2 stacks of the showbread. 2 of this seder, two of the poles. These snifim hold up this pile of bread and or stack of breads, and 2 hold up this stack of breads. Those are the ksot. That these Y-shaped structures. Those are the ksot that mentioned in the Torah. We make 8 rods, 28 rods of gold. They're basically, if you would take bamboo is a hollow tube, and it's 360. If you would cut the bamboo down the middle, you get hollowed bamboo semicircles. So that's basically that. These semi rods of gold. 14 rods for this stack and 14 rods for that stack. Wait a minute. There's 2 breads that are directly on the table. That means there's a stack of 5. So I would think that I would put 3 rods between each bread for a total of 15, but here it says 14. He says those are the menakiot described in the Torah, the rods described in the Torah. Now he's using the word kanim of zahav, but they're called menakiot in Exodus. The 2 bowls, bazich, is a Mishnaic word for the frankincense that was also offered with the showbread. Those actually sit on the table on the sides of these stacks of bread, and those are what are called the kapot. Kapot literally means ladles. That's the the word in Exodus for these things. The molds in which they would make the showbread are what's called a ke'arot, or literally bowls. So a different type of word. Ke'arot is a bowl that you use, let's say, from which you would eat your soup. The kapot is more like a ladle that you use to serve the soup. That's it for today. We're going to once again finish this chapter and begin with the fourth chapter. Don't forget, it's very important that we learn these halachot now so that we're ready. We not get caught by surprise when the temple service is reinitiated, God willing, soon in our days. Be well.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.